Hello and welcome to an episode of Monday Markets, as also brought to you by Woo. Links available in the description below. Also check out my new pinned tweet on Twitter. I've updated my educational resources, so a lot of the stuff I talk about with regard to market structure, order flow, levels, etc. You can learn about it there. So let's talk about BTC. Price, very similar. Structure, quite similar as well. Last week's focus was this consolidation between 60 and 71, with a focus on the range midpoint. We mapped out the same range on the daily time frame using the daily lowest and highest close, and this is the kind of price action that we have. So for the time being, we're still sort of bouncing at the midpoint, but the bounces have been getting weaker. So if we look at the most recent interactions with this midpoint level, and this is bearing in mind that diddling the middle in general isn't attractive. It was kind of a necessary evil in this range because the range low is so beaten up. But in this instance, we had a test here, led to a bit of a bounce, another test that took us to the range high, another test that gave sort of one green candle, and now we're back at the extremity once again. So 3-4 tests there, sort of working its way down the range midpoint. I think at this point, I'm not super interested in diddling in the middle. I was looking for it below this low here. The argument at that point would have just been based on extremity, that we've got daily range low and a spike of this swing low as well. That would have been good enough, at least for a day trade, I think, because then even if I'm targeting the bottom cluster of the midpoint or the upper boundary of the midpoint, there's enough space there if my entry is good enough and there's a clear invalidation. The market didn't end up spiking it, and now we're sort of still pushing the range midpoint with a wick at the moment. So it's kind of a bounce into a form of resistance. If we know that we're in the midpoint at the moment, there's been no daily close below, which is good. So it's still a deep test of support. I think at this point, if you weren't catching the wick at the extremity, really the only other setup that's somewhat attractive is a reclaim of this pretty important daily breakout level. So this lines up with the midpoint area in general. You can see it's former highs, provided all the bounces and very clean sort of straightforward signals on the candle closes as well, and then close below, and this is what's being retested. So I would have preferred, again, to have the spike of the low. Didn't happen, so at this point, if I'm going to let this thing bounce or assume that we're going to attack the range high once again, the earliest indication would be a daily close back above 67.4-ish, being aggressive with it. Absent that, I mean, this is a pretty self-evident pivot. We've broken down from it, so if this is one of those early week traps, where if you think about the anatomy of a weekly candle, you have the open, price drives lower below the open to set the low, and then ends up reclaiming the open and then pushing up to form the candle body portion, with this being the wick portion and whatever else. If that happens, then it kind of needs to happen in the next few days, most likely. Sort of Tuesday, Wednesday. You want to see price accept above the weekly open and start closing the daily above 67.4-ish if there's going to be any momentum to the upside. Absent that, it kind of just looks like the range midpoint is petering out a little bit, and the bounces have been getting weaker. So that's really the inflection point that's important to me. I'm not really willing to short-term short bounces. Haven't traded like that in a while, to be honest. More interested in sort of spot longs or medium-term perp positions, and for me that would ideally be on the long side, and for the moment that's not available on BTC. So fairly straightforward. If there's one thing to take away from this, is that I would watch 67.3, 67.4 for daily closes, and I would also watch the weekly open, which is here. Okay, so the two kind of work in tandem, as mentioned. If this is a bullish weekly setup, you've got the open, this would be the wick portion, right? Wick portion. Above the open would be the body portion of the expansion. And for that to be true, we need to get above this daily resistance level, I think. Other than that, nothing super clear for the time being. I mean, it's slightly frustrating not getting the spike into the low. I don't think perps spiked it either. No, they didn't. But, you know, mistrade. It is what it is. If it doesn't meet your entry criterion or criteria, depending on how many you have, don't get too flustered about it. So yeah, that's pretty much the main thing for BTC. Again, bigger picture. I wouldn't be losing my mind over this because we're still in a very long consolidation, and the better job you can do of keeping your money in it and sticking to only high probability, high conviction setups, ideally at extremities, or even if you're diddling in the middle at the extremities there, like I try to do, I think that's fine. Everything else, I wouldn't read too much into it, to be honest. Still the same structure, broadly speaking. on the ETH front, we had the breakdown, and the daily level that we discussed has been very important. So last week, we kind of debated the merits of just holding spot into the ETF versus being slightly more reactive with it. I mentioned that my approach would be more reactive. That's been okay thus far. This thing's been trading very technically to its credit, so we've for some time focused on this 3600 level. That was, previous highs here. That was the base of this consolidation. And even more recently, I think if you just kept the level from the last Monday markets, it's been very good. You got a retest on this move here, and the most recent bounce as well is still from that daily level of resistance. If you wanted to be slightly more conservative with it, you could just box out or cluster out to the point of breakdown, sort of the mini consolidation that took us below the 3600 level, and have that as your medium-term invalidation, which is to say bearish below 3600, because that's, this ends up being a failed breakdown, and a breakdown from this consolidation in general, bounce into resistance, yada, yada, yada. And if the earliest sign of that being invalidated would be a close above 3600, or more if you're being more conservative with it, 3700. And at that point, both for BTC and ETH, it would essentially look like dips into midpoints and then reclaims of key levels, and you can target the expansion portion for the week if it's going to be a good week. For BTC, that's around the range midpoint, and that's 67.3 level. For ETH, I think that's 3600, 3700. But in terms of what's in front of us at the moment, we've kind of had, at least on ETH, breakdown, retest of resistance, and on BTC, deep test of the range midpoint, and also I think currently a retest of resistance of some sort. But again, if this is like an early week trap, we're already above the weekly open, which is good. And step 2 for expansion, if it's bullish, would be daily close above 67.3, 67.4. And I think then this entire chunk of selling is in trouble, and we probably sort of move back into this consolidation as a whole. Okay, but some more evidence required there. That's really all I want to talk about, to be honest, because, I mean, ETH BTC hasn't really been doing anything. There was some bounce, I think, from the weekly area that we discussed on Casual Friday, but, nothing super notable, and it's given back some portion of that now. And also, more pertinently, altcoins look very bad. Just breakdown, full retrace. I mean, look, we're sort of hovering around prices from October, November of 2023, right? Or even if we look at the April lows, in some cases, that's where the market is trading at the moment. So same here, back at the lows, back at the lows, back at the lows, retrace. I mean, BNB is strong, but failed breakout. Back at the lows, holding up decently well on the bonk side. Maybe that's one for Altcoin Thursday. Dogecoin back at the lows, back at the lows, back at the lows, breakdown, back at the lows, shitty range, back at the lows, back at the lows, back at the lows, back at the lows. I'm going to stop doing this fruitless exercise rather. But I mean, if you're very short-term trading and you're looking for just some sort of range low relief bounce, there are a ton of charts that are reaching local extremities. And if that's interesting, we can discuss them on Altcoin Thursday. I feel really bad for always saying Altcoin Thursday and then nothing happens on Thursday, but this week, it will happen this week, okay? So we can discuss some of these range low setups. I'll probably say, Dom, what do you think of this support? He says, it's fucked. Let's look at Litecoin. And I'll be like, oh shit, okay, this is a fantastic show. But otherwise, I'm not too enthused by this type of price action. Yeah, that's really it. Again, these videos are just kind of sharing what I think is most pertinent and relevant, and sometimes what's most pertinent and relevant isn't super interesting or can be summarized in some more brief terms. So that's what I'm doing here, even though I'm defeating my own message by rambling at the moment. If you have some time left over that you'd ordinarily spend watching Technical Roundup on Monday markets, go over to my pinned tweet, and I'm sure there are some articles or videos or resources that you missed that are worth catching up on and might make your trading slightly better. That's all from me. Thank you to Woo for supporting the show. If you want to check out a centralized exchange, links are available in the description below. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, all the usual stuff. We appreciate all the support, even when Don gets main charactered, or I guess especially when Don gets main charactered. And yeah, see you later in the week. Thanks. Bye-bye.